Welcome to my box bag. It's a simple design, but it's not simplistic. The box bag creates ample space for your phone, purse or whatever else you need to bring. You need 28 inches of shell fabric, you need 28 inches of the lining, an 11-inch zip, purse feet if you've got them. You don't necessarily need them, but definitely should have a base, which you can get from Asda. It's just a plastic cutting board I'm using. And then also you need 30 centimeters of slim elastic. Cut all the pieces according to the lay plan. Join both handles using the seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Iron the seam apart. Iron handle lengthways in half. Then fold one side up to the center crease and iron again. Fold the opposite in towards the center and iron both on top of each other. Make sure that you have a complete circle and join the open ends again with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Then you can just finger iron the seam apart. Fold both sides inwards and then just pin it into place. You could of course iron this at this stage as well. Prepare the fastening. Now if you're using oilcloth, the lining is not necessary as the material is fairly stiff already. But if you are using a home decor fabric, then you should sandwich the zip between the shell and lining and then stitch as close as possible to the zip teeth. Then you want to just pull the lining out so it lies flat for your top stitching, and then you can roll the shell layer closer to the zip. When you've done that, you need to check that your zip fastening measures exactly 11 centimeters all the way across. That's 4.3 inches. And if it's a little bit wider, then you need to trim it. Now we want to do the outer shell pockets. So place the lining of the outside pocket, right sides facing, on top of the shell fabric. Pin the long edge, which is the pocket opening, and then we're going to sew it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now we're going to do something called understitching, which means the seam allowance will be moved towards the lining and then you stitch on top 3 millimeters, that's just 0.1 inches from the seam line. And when you're doing the understitching, the lining will become slightly longer, so you want to trim that to fit the shell fabric. Pin the pleats of the mobile phone pocket, and the pleats have to face towards the side, with the right sides facing each other, so 1 centimeter from the top edge all the way around, but you stop 1 centimeter before the end again, and you have to leave a gap between the pleats. Turn the pocket and then press it. Stitch across the top with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which creates the tunnel for the elastic. Then you want to thread through the elastic and secure it with a pin. pull the elastic so the pocket looks straight again, and then you can pin that to the lining, and you need to be 2.5 centimeters, that's just an inch above the slightly higher corner, so that it doesn't get folded into the base of the bag. And then you just top stitch all the way around. And I would also suggest to do another 3mm stitch from the first line just at the top to ensure that the elastic can't slip out, because mine actually eventually did, and it's really annoying now. I've got a really loose pocket. For the receipt pocket, you want to fold the pocket over, right sides facing, sew all the way around, and then leave a gap again so that you can turn it. So turn the pocket inside out, and then you can fold the corners over each other and then turn it while you're still holding on to it, and that gives you a really flat corner. It's a very good trick to know. You can, of course, just work them out with a pin. That works too. Pin the pocket to the lining, again the 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch up from the slightly higher corner, and then we top stitch that all the way around, leaving the top open, of course. Now we're going to close the lining. Place the lining pieces on top of each other, right sides facing, and close the sides and the base. Then you want to iron the seams apart first. Then you open out the corners and line up the seams, pin, and then you stitch across it, and that gives you this shape of the base of the bag, which gives you this additional room at the bottom. It's very good. Now place the shell pockets onto the bag body. So place the bag body right sides facing on top of each other, and then pin the base on. You can join with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and then iron the seam apart. And the next stitch is the top stitching, which you can of course leave off, but I think it looks a little more professional. So make sure though that if you do top stitching that it's always quite a long stitch so that it doesn't look homemade. Now we want to place our ironed handles on the bag body and place a pin as a marker about 5 millimeters lower than the outer pockets. We're going to sew the handle on later, and we want the seam to slightly overlap. And we will only stitch between those markers, and I would suggest a double stitch, which gives the bag strength and it looks really good too, so do that. You also want to top stitch the edge of the pocket 2 centimeters down from the edge, again with a long stitch length, so it looks really cool. And I have used for everything a contrast thread, but that's only because I want to demonstrate it so that you can see it better. And if I did it again just for myself, I probably would use a matching thread. And if you use matching thread, then if you have a slight wobble, it doesn't really matter. So you have to decide what you want to do. Now we're top stitching the handle between these marker pins. And then we can place the handles back onto the bag. We pin the handle in 5 centimeters from each edge, and that's perfect really. And then we top stitch them in place. Again, we're doing those 2 lines so we end up exactly on the same lines that we've already done. If you're using purse feet, then now's the time to put the holes into the bag and into your base. So put your base underneath, position your purse feet, and then punch the holes through all the way through your bag and through your plastic. And once we've done that, we can forget about it until we finish the bag almost, and then we can push the purse feet through once we're finished sewing, because the base will be far too hard to sew with if you did it right now. The outside pockets are a little bit wider. That gives you a bit more space if you have a bag of tissues or something. So you need to actually allow for that space, and you do have to flatten it out. It'll be slightly awkward, so if you put a pin into the corner, as you can see me do here, that works quite nicely. You've got to take your time with this. Most of the lines on this bag are straight, but when it comes to doing these little pockets, they actually are more tricky than they look, so you need to really make sure that that goes in nice and flat so you don't end up with any pleats. Now I would like you to fashion a little small tab. That's just a little scrap of fabric. Turn it over, stitch it down foot width, then turn it inside out. You can stitch along either side, that top stitching, fold it in half, insert a little ring or a D-ring or whatever else you need for this. I think there are loads of things out there already, something nice and dangly. And then you fold that over in half, and then you stick that into the side seam. Now we want to fold the sides over, and then we close the side seams. When you do your side seams, it's quite important that you make sure that your outer pockets actually do line up. So keep checking that, and don't let the fabric push. It will want to do that because you're working with quite a few layers. And then iron the seam apart, and next we're going to top stitch again. However, if you find this too difficult to get in here, and you probably will do with oilcloth, that would be really hard to do, then you can just omit this and leave this step out. And after that we do the same as we did with the lining. We will open out our seams, so we got this sort of fish mouth shape. And we stitch across that with the 1 centimeter seam allowance, and that gives us again that shape for the bag. Now I'm going to insert the lining. The first thing to do is to put the base in, whether you have purse feet or not, and then the lining is going to go in with the wrong sides facing each other. And because you've got a lot of different layers now, of course the lining is going to be a little bit too big. So what you want to do is pin it all the way around and then trim it so that it fits snugly in the bag. If you make any other bag, you also need to do this little step. It's quite a good one. Open out your bag so that you've got the side seams in the middle, and when they're on top of each other, you mark the corners that you get, and then you also mark the middle of your zip fastening. And then you turn your bag inside out, so we've got the right side on the inside, and then you put right sides facing your zip fastening onto those snips and you marry them up. Then you start sewing along the edge, and you stop 1 centimeter before the end, and you start 1 centimeter after the beginning, and that's your seam allowance, which then goes across. So once you've sewn that, what you want to do is cut into your shell fabric exactly to that stitching line, and that will open out really nicely so that you can now sew across it. So you pin that really well as well. And then you try to actually go all the way across so that you catch that little corner really well. You might even want to go backwards and forwards over it. And then once you've done that, you can trim your zip. And then I would suggest that you zigzag all the way around with a wide zigzag stitch. If you've used oilcloth, you don't of course need to do any of that. If you have an overlocker, you can overlock all the way around, or you could even bind it, but that's entirely up to you. Cut the corners, then you turn the bag back to the right side. Now you want to push the sides about 2.5 centimeters down and pin that evenly all the way around. And then you top stitch all around the edge, and again long stitch length, and I would suggest that you do it foot width from the edge. That looks slightly nicer than too close. And we're done. I think this is a really nice little bag. We've got this, so I don't know what's going to go on here. Probably some nice keyring I can find somewhere. If you come up with a really great idea for this little thing, then please send me your pictures. I'd be really keen to see it. And what I like about these bags is that there's nothing in there that would give it this shape. Sometimes these bags are just filled with whatever to puff them up a bit so that you can, you know, so that they look like they're really nice and round, but actually they don't stand like that. There's nothing in here. It is just the way that you put it together with adding these bits in here and having the zip slightly lower down that it stands up. You could of course have added some linings to it, but I think it's quite thick already. The only thing you could do is put an extra little bit around the edge here if you think that's a little bit too soft, but I think it's absolutely fine. The nice thing is I've got a really heavy wallet here, and you put that in and the bag stays the same. Yeah, it doesn't come out the bottom. You've got that nice sturdy bottom in it, which is just a cutting board from Asda, and it's dead cheap to do. So very happy with it. Coming on holiday with me. New from Mrs. Crabtree Makes is this snack pack, snack wrap and tissue holder. She's making these fantastic little lunch bags, which is made with a so easy boxy bag pattern, and then 3 further patterns available from Frocks and Frolics. Could have a go at that. That's really totally easy beginner stuff. And if you are hooked on bags, why not try the messenger bag next? Also available from Craftsy with a weld pocket, so go for it. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you soon. All you have to do to find all these patterns is go below this video, and all the links are just underneath.